Okay, hello and welcome everyone to the Grants and Public Libraries webinar, or Grants for Public Libraries. My name is Beth Yates. I'm the Children's Consultant from the Indiana State Library's Professional Development Office. I will be your host and question moderator today. Our presenter today is Angela Fox. She's the Public Library Services and LSTA Grant Consultant here at the Indiana State Library. And we do also have a special guest who will speak briefly. Her name's Katie Lehman. She's a former Public Indiana Library employee and now works for the Department of Education as an out-of-school time specialist. So we're very happy to have her here too. Just a few announcements. First of all, to register for other webinars and other trainings available from the Professional Development Office, please see the Indiana State Library's events calendar, which can be found on our website at www.in.gov/library, and then it's under Services for Libraries. And then this session is 1 hour and you're eligible to receive 1 LEU for this presentation. And if you're watching a recording of this webinar, instructions on how to obtain your LEU are in the video's description on YouTube. Or you can also find those instructions on the Indiana State Library's continuing education site under LEU policies. But in short, when you watch a recording, someone in administration at your library should create a certificate for you, as they're the ones who can verify that you watched. Okay, I think we are finally ready to get started. Again, today, our primary presenter is Angela Fox of the Indiana State Library. So take it away, Angela.
Great, thank you, Beth. Is my audio on finally? Yes, first time this morning, I did it right. Okay, so just a real quick overview of what we'll be looking at today, because I know some people in the chat were saying they are from different states and whether this would be relevant. We're really breaking this webinar into two different sections. So at the front part, we're going to talk about where to find library grants, or at the very least, where to look for library grants and cross your fingers. And that includes tips in general for looking for local and federal and state. And I do have a few that are specific to Indiana, but most of what I share, I think, is going to be pretty well, useful in other areas. And then the second half is going to be, okay, you actually found something that you can and want to apply for, how to put your best foot forward, some strategies to approach that grant application. So I will say, as we go into looking for grants, that as an LSTA person here at the library, one of the questions I get on a somewhat regular basis, I get variations of, hey, we have this project in mind. Do you happen to know any grants for it? And I often send out a variation of the exact same answer, which is, oh gosh, no, nothing specific, nothing that is specifically for this sort of project, but here's a great place to look. Or have you checked your community foundation? Or just more general advice. And I thought for the longest time, I must be really bad at my job because I cannot find any grants that match this situation. Wow, at some point, someone's going to call me out and say, you are not a good grants person. But the thing is, I think this is not me just covering myself, but I think there is a fairly common perception, or at least especially entering the library world, maybe you get a little more jaded as you go, but that there are sources of grants out there that are fairly easy to find, or that are all compiled in a beautiful area, or they're there and no one has told you where they are. And if someone would just give you that website or that key phrase to look for, then you could go ahead and do it yourself. But people who have grants, who talk about grants, or you should look for grants. I can't find grants. Where are these? And this is even what I thought. I'm like, where am I supposed to be looking that I am missing, that I am not finding these? And the truth is, there is not a great one-size-fits-all way to look for grants. There is not a great efficient way to look for grants a lot of times. I would love it if there was a wonderful one-stop aggregator, and we will talk midway through here about some of the grant aggregators and some of their strengths, but they have disadvantages. And also often the largest ones, the biggest archives that pull from the most, often have dead links and have grants that haven't been issued for the last 2 decades or whatnot. So it can be very discouraging. That said, I am not here to start a grants webinar with, hey, let's find grants. By the way, there are none. I obviously, there are some out there, and I very much think it is worthwhile talking about where to look for them. So I'm hoping to give you some tips on how to find them today. But just know, if you have looked for them in the past and said, I'm just having trouble, I'm not turning them up, it's not just you. It is not a real easy thing to look for. In fact, if you have been looking for grants before and you said, especially this year, where the heck are they? I am not finding anything. It is, again, not just you. So this is the first year historically. Giving USA has traced charitable donations over the years, and it almost always goes up and up and up. And especially during COVID, it skyrocketed. And then all of a sudden in 2022, and what we've seen of 2023, it's plummeted. It's the first time, it's the lowest that Americans have given to charity in about 30 years. Like, it didn't just set itself back after COVID, it plummeted. And the places that Americans are giving charity, their priorities, they're changing. The ones that took the biggest hits were charities that focused on human services, charities that focused on animal environments, and educational. So those three there that took the big hits, two of them I would say are pretty relevant to library interests. They're places that libraries might try to categorize themselves. So they have dropped off. And granted, this organization, they were tracking all giving. So this is private as well as public and foundations and community foundations and these bigger ones. And private individuals may not give as much to libraries to begin with, but it has dropped across the board. So if you've been successful in the past and have really struggled this year, hey, it is a horrible year for grants. It's not just you. Again, I am meant to cheer you on. This is not supposed to be the most depressing webinar in the world. The point is, do not beat up on yourself if you're struggling. This year in particular has been very, very difficult. So again, I hope at the start of this, I'm going to give you some places to look and even some solid links and some concrete grants that you can use. And actually, the first thing I'm going to do before we go much further is I'm going to turn this over to Katie, because she has an actual concrete lead and solid grant that you can use. And she also has other commitments. So we're going to let her kind of skip ahead here. So Katie.
Thanks, Angela. So hello, everyone. I'm so excited that Angela let me jump on today to talk to you about the 21st Century Community Learning Center grant, also known as the 21st CPLC. You'll hear it referred to that a lot at the state level. So the good thing is if you're not from Indiana, 21st Century is allocated from the Federal Department of Education to the state and exists in just about every state across the United States. So everything that I'm telling you here today could be applicable to your state as well, as long as your state allows funds to go to community-based organizations, which we do here in Indiana. So the 21st Century Community Learning Center grant is, again, it's a grant that's awarded from the Federal Department of Education down to the state education agency. And then the state education agency holds a competitive grant process, a request for proposals, where programs such as schools, both public, private, and charter, and community-based organizations, for the sake of this presentation, libraries would fall into that, can then apply for funds. So one of the interesting things about this grant is we only have one library in the state of Indiana that receives these grant funds. And the reason I know that, one, is because I work at the IDOE, but two, because I also ran that program for several years, in addition to the Ready Readers program at the Muncie Public Library. So that specific library is a grantee, which means they receive a full allocation of funding to serve and provide an after-school program at their library. So they actually have a full after-school program of usually about 55 kids that come to the library Monday through Thursday, and it's run entirely from the 21st Century grant. It provides the transportation, it provides all of the curriculum, it provides the staffing, so it provides for salary and benefits for qualified staff. And so it's almost like a self-contained program within the library, because it is completely funded by this grant. But there's a couple different ways that libraries can use these funds. So obviously, one, they can apply to be a grantee if they have the space and capacity to do so. But they can also partner with grantees, so with schools and other organizations that receive these funds, because 21st century funds can be used to expand library service hours. So I made sure that I clarified this with the federal department rep before I came on this presentation to make sure I understood what that looked like. So essentially what a public library can do is they can partner with the 21st century program to hold special programs specific to 21st century families or participants. So that may be you hold a financial literacy night and you keep the library open 2 additional hours so that these families can come in and participate. The grant fund can then pay for the staff of the library to stay on those additional hours, for maintenance to stay on, so that those the library doesn't have to worry about staffing that program after. And I know that sounds a little bit interesting. So it's basically an MOU partnership where those funds then would be paid to the library. Now I know libraries are nonprofits, so then those funds would have to be fed back into your library services, but it's something that can happen. Again, you can be a grantee, which means that you would go through the whole competitive RFP process, which is lengthy, but the next one launches in February of 2024. That will be our cohort 12, and then we will launch our cohort 13 exactly 1 year later in February 2025. So one of the cool things about Indiana is that we hold a grantee readiness series, which means if you're a new organization or even a returning one that wishes to apply for the grant, we have a whole readiness series that walks you through that process. So kind of what each piece entails, all of the guidelines and requirements, and then tries to set you up for success as we move into the full application process. So we don't, at Indiana, we actually don't review any of the applications because it is a competitive grant. It is a third-party process, and so we actually don't know who our grantees are going to be until they've gone through our evaluation process and the grantees have been selected, and then we get notified. So if you'd like to know more information about 21st century programs, and I know based on just where you all said that you were from, that many of you are in cities, towns that have 21st century programs. So it might be worth reaching out to your school districts to see if there would be a way for you to partner with that. But anyway, you can find more information at the link that is listed on the slide, or you can email me directly. I'm going to drop my contact information into the chat so that you'll have that. But yeah, happy to answer any questions quickly before we move on, or I can just drop that email in there and you guys can email me your questions directly.
Yeah, if anybody has any questions for Katie, you can pop them in the chat. I don't see any popping up quite yet. So why don't you just put your email in for now? And we'll get you any of those questions if we get them in the meantime, Katie. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay, so moving right along, kind of taking a step back to look at grants in general. To know where to look for grants, you have to know who makes the grants. And if you do any research, there's a lot of different ways that you can sort them and you can organize them. You know, I've seen government versus private and local versus national and different focal areas, but really it's the same clumps of people making charitable donations, making grants, and those are government agencies, and they can make at the local, state, or federal level, corporations, and they can also, that can include large corporations that give nationally, or again, those who say, yeah, we're a huge national corporation, but you have to live within, X number of miles from one of our locations. And then foundations, and those are public and private, and I'll talk about the difference between those in just a little bit. So if you've ever done grants training with me before, ever in the years that I've been here, whether it's been as a new director training or trustee training or any of the other ones we offer, or if you've ever emailed me about grants, you have heard a variation of what I'm going to say, which is the best possible place that I can advise you to look for grants is at the local level. Look close to home. They tend not to be flashy. They may not even be grants in name. They may just be you knocking on the door and saying, hey, I have a cool idea for a project. Do you have money for me? But that tends to be so much more effective than some of the larger grants, the ones that are better well known. Local grantors, they want the money to stay in their community. They want to see the benefits of that money. It's not bad PR for them, to depending on whether it's an organization or not. And the benefit of this is the closer to home you are, local and state, those are going to be much smaller competitive pools that you are up against. If you are looking to a community foundation, you may only be competing with other organizations in your county. If you're looking to a state, and we'll talk about this, you're only competing, let's say, with libraries in your state. That's a lot. Your odds are a lot better with those than they are with these big national ones. So at the local level, you can always check in with public service and social organizations. So if you live anywhere near a Kiwanis or a Lions Club or a Rotary branch, places like that, they may not have actual grants, but if you know somebody in there and can kind of get a foot in the door, or tell them that you're interested in pitching an idea to someone, that can often help. Local businesses, it doesn't hurt to check with, banks, real estate agencies, those that are well established in town. Also, if you have like a visitors bureau, a convention bureau, they might have some money. Again, they don't necessarily always come out and say, here's our grant, here's our scholarship, whatever, apply for it. But if you approach them about an idea, they may tell you, oh, we do have a cycle where we take ideas, or we can bring this up at our next meeting. It never hurts to ask. Local businesses can also do sponsorships that, we've seen that before. It's not technically a grant, but it frees up money for other projects you need to do. So, for instance, if one of the libraries I worked at way back in the olden days, when there were lots of magazines and people came for magazines and they read the magazines, we had all those plastic covers, and on each and every single one of them was a huge sticker that had a local real estate business in town, because they provided the subscriptions for the magazine, and that's what the sticker said. And that subscription money could go to something else, some other program that we were really excited about. And then finally, the big one, the heaviest hitters, I think, of any of the grants or possible places I can tell you, is your local community foundation. And I cannot stress this enough. We don't track grants at an annual level here at Indiana. We only check in, every couple of years or so and say, hey, at a required sort of annual report, and say, what sort of grants do you have? And when we do that, every single time, overwhelmingly, by the numbers, the grants that are being reported are community foundations. So many more. Like, you may have a handful, 5 or less federal grants, and then you'll have some more of the state, especially if it's LSTA grants. And then you see just list after list after list of community foundations, because again, those foundations want the money to stay in their community. Now, if you're looking for sheer amounts, a lot of times it's smaller amounts. So you may have to go for multiple, or you may have to scale down projects, but they are a really good place to start. And most community foundations, you're going to have one for a county, or possibly, if it's a smaller county, like a multi-county area. And so community foundations are basically, they're going to fund other nonprofits, or they're going to fund other grant-making agencies. So they can bring in the money, and then they can distribute it to others. The nice thing about community foundations is, unlike what I've been saying about it's hard to find grants, it's really easy to find your community foundation. You could pretty much just go to Google and say, Indiana, Allen County, Community Foundation, hit enter, and it's going to tell you the ones in there. Or if you want to do it more like officially and make it look nice and pretty, you go to the link there, the Grantsmanship Center, they have, there's a lot of stuff that is paid on that site. You have to pay for access. You don't have to pay to access this particular list of community foundations, and it has all of them in Indiana. It has links or contacts when it's available. Speaking of this link here, we will be making available a PDF that has a handout that has every single link that I mentioned on here, every single place to look. So that will be shared after the fact. So don't feel like you have to be scribbling down URLs as we go, because that is impossible and annoying. Before we move on, just a quick note on private foundations. These are different than community foundations. And so if a community foundation, if their cause is the community, the betterment of their community, a private foundation is going to tend to have like a narrower focus, an issue focus, whether that's childhood literacy or cancer or homelessness, you know, feeding the hungry, that sort of thing. There are 3 types of private foundations operating, which we can kind of dismiss in hand because they keep their money in house. They set it up, and instead of giving it away, they just do their own projects. Family are the foundations that a lot of people are familiar with. It just means that somebody established it, and traditionally, even as it goes, at least a family member sits on the board in future years and keeps the name going. The Gates Foundation would be a really good example of that. And then corporate foundations, and those are the ones that they will show up under the federal ones on the slide here, some of them. Corporate foundations, it's money from big corporations, from your big companies. It is legally separate from the corporation. It has to do with IRS and taxes and setting up a different operating arm for that foundation. But essentially, there are some companies that just provide grants, and there are some companies that create a foundation to provide grants. So Walmart, I actually have them listed. They have given money to libraries through one of their grants. They don't technically give the money away. It's the Walmart Charitable Foundation that gives it away. So I don't know. I'm not in the IRS. I don't care how they have to do it. I just care that they're giving money to libraries. So they can sort all of that out for themselves. To look for private foundations, if you are interested to see if there's any family ones or those in your area that might be of benefit, you can look on the Grantsmanship Center, that slide that I showed you earlier. There is a link on there also for top foundations in your state. So not just community ones, but top granting foundations. And it won't be a complete list. It's not all inclusive. You don't get that unless you pay for that, but it will have the ones that have given the most money away in your state. And that's a great place to start. And I recently became aware of a resource, Grants.io, that is very, I had not heard of this before, but if you're giving money away, you have to file with the IRS. And this site takes, and it has compiled like every organization that has given money away. It makes it searchable. So essentially you can go to the site and you can say, I want to see, you can search by past grants. I want to see who has given grants to money in the state of Indiana. And then you will see a listing of every single organization and the place that they gave the money. So you can say, I want to see, you know, again, libraries, and then that's not a bad place to start. So I'm not going to take us online to look at that because that has never gone well for me. But I will say, when you go to the search page, just a quick tip, if you decide to look at this place, you will see where I've highlighted my little scribble, the search key. Before you do anything else, I recommend you put in your state. Because if you look on the left-hand side, you're going to see a whole bunch of filters. And one of the filters is state. And unless you are a big state, your state is not going to be listed. And you're going to say, what? I can't look. No, you can look. Just put in your state first, hit search. And then like magic, your state is going to appear under that grant filter. You can click on it, and then you can go back to the search and do another term. Then you can search for library. Then you can search for early literacy. So pretend you have searched for Indiana. You can see, in fact, at the left side of your screen, I have clicked that Indiana filter. I went back to the search bar, I typed library, and then you get the pages. What you're seeing here is the foundations, the private foundations that have donated money to these libraries that have clicked on that key search. If you click on one of those foundations, the nice thing about this, and I went too far. The frustrating thing about this is that across the top, there are a bunch of different little symbols underneath their name. The dollar, if it's lit up, all of these are lit up on this example. The dollar means they've given recently, as opposed to years and years in the past. If there's a person, it means it's likely staffed. If there's a globe, it means they have a web address and you can click on there to get to their page. If it has a lock, it means that it's lit up. It means that they take open solicitations. They take, people bidding for money. If it's not lit up, it means it is private, that is invite only. And this is the most frustrating thing about this site, is if you go through it, you get really excited because you get pages and pages of these foundations you haven't heard of that have donated money. And many of them, if not most of them, are going to be invite only. But you sometimes come across those who aren't. So it'd be something to look at. Maybe you have a volunteer who's tech savvy. Moving on to state grants. So there are a bunch of grants that the state it's either state money or it's the state acts as the pass-through agency. So there's some of those too, but basically the state is administering these grants. So you can look in different various state departments through that would seem to have some sort of connection to libraries. So like humanities, we do humanities programs. Arts, we do art program. Historical society, we want to preserve our newspapers. So you can do that. You can use this as a cheat sheet. So the ones I have on the slide here, they are all ones that have given money in the past to Indiana libraries, some more than others. Indiana Humanities has an active grant program. I'd say out of all the ones on the screen, they are the ones that we most hear about libraries getting grants from. They share a lot with libraries. And again, the PDF I provide you is going to have direct links to their grants pages. So you can click on there and see what their grants are about. Indiana Arts Commission has arts project support grants. The Historical Society and the Indiana Department of Natural Resources, they both have grants that are focused on history and especially preservation. The Heritage Support Grant, which is the Historical Society grant, it says it's in the areas of capacity building and collection stewardship. It's actually a little more broad than the DNR one, so that's worth taking a look at. The Department of Natural Resources, if you have a historic building, that one might be a little bit of a better fit for you. Or if you want to do a program on preservation, they also give funds for that. So if you want to, show the public if you're working on a project or something, that you might be able to get some money for that. Down at the bottom or to the left there, the Office of Community and Rural Affairs, they do something called Community Development Block Grants. And I always give them the shout out because they are one of the very few grant makers that I know of that this grant specifically allows construction cost. It is so difficult to find a grant that allows construction cost. It may be the only thing that may be like more difficult would be one that allows for food, but construction cost is always difficult. And it is always something that libraries tend to need. Things break down, buildings get old. So that is definitely something to look at. Unlike most of the grants, that the links that I'll share with you, this one does not take you straight to an application. You cannot apply online. It is going to make you talk to your local representative and it will let you know who that is so you can contact them and discuss whether you're eligible and whether this would be a good fit for you. LSTA grants. So this is a little bit of a sticky wicket for me because that's in my job title, LSTA grants. I feel very strongly about these. I usually start out grants presentations by saying, I have to talk about this. It's the greatest grant in the world because you're only competing with Indiana libraries and we have so your odds are really great. And it's the best grant for first timers because we really want you to succeed and we hold your hands and we review your applications and we give you tips and there's technology and digitization subgrants, but you would not believe the sort of things that fall under technology if you're creative and you word it well enough. It's a fantastic grant. It has been suspended for the last several years because we have been dealing in a good way with CARES money and with ARPA money, and we just do not have the staffing and the means to do multiple grant programs at once and the scale that those required. So that's why we've been gone for a couple of years. And I've been really excited to gear up to tell people that we're back. And I just found out last week we are probably almost certainly not going to be back for this year, which is disappointing. In a nutshell, if you are an Indiana library, you may be familiar with a little situation that's happening with our courier. Yeah, we'll leave it at that. But since we are switching couriers, there are costs associated with that. We do not want to pass those on to our libraries. We do not want a huge jump in what they have to pay. So the money has to come from somewhere. It's decided this would be a good use of the money that would benefit the most libraries. So if you don't get money for an LSTA grant this year, I apologize, but hopefully it will help a little bit when the courier service is running again smoothly, knock wood, and you don't have to pay an arm and a leg for it. And hopefully 2025. So federal grants, a quick note on federal grants, and I kind of touched on this earlier. You're competing with more people, so the odds are already against you. They're really flashy. People get excited by them because they're big money. They tend to be big money. But know that big money comes with more competition, but it also comes you almost certainly have to be a big library or a bigger library to qualify for one of these, because these organizations want to give money to other organizations that they know can handle that money, that has successfully done it in the past, that has a history of doing projects on a grand scale, of being good stewards of money to that degree. So they very rarely give money to small organizations. You can increase your odds by partnering. They love to see partners because it decreases the risk. If you have more people who are working on it, it's less likely that you flake out and the project doesn't get done. There's more accountability. So that does help, but keep that in mind that if you're a small rural institution, you are at a bit of a disadvantage. The one place this really isn't going to be a factor, really, the IMLS grants. So real quick, if you're looking for grants, you can always just say, well, I need, the Institute for Museum and Library Services seems like a natural, that's a branch of government that would be good. Maybe the Department of Education, maybe, again, if you're brainstorming departments, you can just go to their page and search for grants. Indiana doesn't have a one-stop, these are all our government grants, unfortunately. You can go to grants.gov, which is one-stop all things federal grants. So you can look for all of the nation and then look and see if you qualify there. That site, I have had people say, oh, no, you have to have a subscription. You have to have a subscription to apply directly, but you can search, like to hit the button and just apply from the site, but you can search the site without having a subscription. And it's real easy once you know what the grant is called to go over to our friend Google or Bing or whatever search engine you're using and look it up by its name. I did mention IMLS is a great place. They are actually, of the federal grants, these are probably the most promising for libraries. Go figure, the one with libraries in the department title. They have changing grant opportunities. It's not always the same every year. There are two that have survived for years and years and years, though, and will probably be there for the, long haul. But the National Leadership Grants and the Laura Bush 21st Century Librarian Grants, those are almost certainly going to happen every single year. And then there may be other opportunities, like there was some opportunities with ARPA money. They've had special projects. Basically, you're just they've even had LSTA money where you're cutting out the middleman. And instead of saying, we'll go to the state library, you go straight to IMLS and say, hey, do you have any left over? Other places, other departments that might be worth looking that have had grants that libraries would be eligible for or could find helpful. The National Endowment for the Humanities. The U.S. Department of Agriculture may not seem like a great fit, but they have something called a Rural Development Loan and Grant Assistance Program. And within there, they have Community Facilities Direct Loan and Grant Program. And if you are a small rural library, you may qualify for one of these. They like small libraries, like very small, population size 5,500 or less gets high priority. And if you are in an economically depressed community, so if you are in a poor community or a small community, that's where they want to put their money. And then they do have grants for that. But even if you don't get grants, just a little side note, if you need to get a loan for a building project, USDA, they do a lot of loans with libraries with good negotiated rates. I mentioned IMLS, the National Historic Publications and Record Commission, the archives, they have grants for preservation sorts of things. So again, if you're trying to preserve historical documents or whatnot, the National Network of Libraries of Medicine, they pop up quite a bit. It looks like you need a subscription to benefit from their funding, but you don't have to pay for it. You just have to sign up and basically be on a mailing list or maybe get an email or two on a regular basis. So corporations, sometimes community still plays a role, so you'll want to look at the eligibility. As I said, you may have a major national corporation, but they want to give in communities that that are within X number of miles of one of their plants or one of their stores. So that's important to keep in mind. They frequently change. It is really difficult to keep up with some of them because they change requirements, they change the type of grants they're doing. They tend to stay in the same focal area, but just because they have a grant that is library friendly one year, maybe the next year they say it's only good for schools or it's only good for non-government organizations. So don't bank on the same opportunities being there every year is what I'm saying, basically. So you can see on the screen here, and I'm not going to go through all of those because I want to make sure to get through the slides. And again, links on the PDF I'll be sharing. But these are national corporations that have given money to libraries, and a special shout out to the Dollar General Corporation, their literacy foundation. This one, I think of all the ones on the screen, it got the top spot for a reason on this screen, because we regularly do hear about Indiana libraries getting money from them. They have a very robust giving program for literacy. They have youth literacy, family literacy, young adult literacy, and a special summer reading program grant. So those are all things that you might be eligible for. Looking at the aggregators, I mentioned this is the dream, just a one-stop shopping for grants. But in reality, it's really hard to keep up with grants because they're changing. And if these places don't have someone dedicated to keeping up with them, you may find a lot of dead links. Not to pick on Scholastic, which is on here, but I see Scholastic cited all the time as an aggregator to use. And when I went there, I went there not that long ago, they had 29 links. Of those, 14 were completely dead, got a 404 page. One got me a page that just looked like a walking computer virus. And I was so paranoid, I was gonna have to go to the state and say, I broke your computer, but I swear I wasn't trying to buy illegal drugs online or, use something very sketchy. I wanted a grant and they weren't gonna believe me, but they had one that was for libraries, and you had to go to the Library of Congress to pick up your books. And they had about 5 that I think would have been ones that would appeal to Indiana libraries or might be good for libraries in general. So you might have to do a little bit of searching on them, is what I am saying. Some of these are better than others. ALA is on there. ALA is very comprehensive, but they also have like every single grant from every department they've ever had. So you can say, oh my gosh, we could really use money to start a graphic novel collection. And then you look and it was always look at the last given date. It was like given in 2001. That one may not be worth your time. It's probably a dead grant. Demco and EBSCO actually have ones that are fairly up to date. The Library Grants blog, out of all of them, it is the least pretentious. It looks like a blog. It's not flashy. It's what you see is what you get. But the person who runs this does such a great job of having up-to-date links, up-to-date grants. I cannot recommend enough the work that she does. I don't know her, just shout out to the person who's on there because she does some great work. I have 2 other state libraries on here. Obviously, if you go to Colorado or Nevada and you look at their sites, the local grants are not going to pertain to you unless you are a friend from Colorado or Nevada, but they have a really nice job with federal grant opportunities. They tend to keep them up to date. And I'm saying this as somebody who, yes, Indiana has its own grants portal, but it's nice some of the other states pick up on stuff that we may not catch and vice versa. And then the Grant Makers IO, I mentioned in the previous one, it's a past grant aggregator. It doesn't tell you what's out there. It tells you what grants have been given in the past, so you know who to pester in the future. There are some paid resources. Don't be scared off by some of these, even if you can't pay for them, because most paid resources will allow you to access at least a limited amount of materials. You won't be able to do full searches, unfortunately, for most of them, which is frustrating. But GrantStation and the Grantsmanship Center specifically both have some really nice educational information on, here's advice on how to write grants, or here's some templates you can use, or here's a neat little video you can watch. So it's worth it for the resources. Writing grant applications, real quick, just because I want to keep aware of the time. So sorry if I speed up a little bit here. But things to keep in mind. When I was researching for this one, I watched a fabulous webinar by Becky Hale, I believe her name is from the State Library of Iowa, and she is a grant winning machine. She has been on the other side, she's been on review committees and she has won so many. So she knows grants in and out. And she stresses over and over again that to win a grant, not only do you need to find a grant, but you need to make sure that you have a good idea for something that addresses a community need. You need to find the right place. Just because you have a grant, it may not be a great fit. You may not have missions that align. And then you need to put together a superior proposal. You need to outdo everybody else who has managed to find that grant. So if you think that you fit these, if you think you can fit these, a couple questions to ask before you start doing the work is, should you apply? So the can you is pretty basic. Are you eligible? Do not put effort into a grant application only to find out 3 pages in, oh, shoot, it says no government entities, or oh, shoot, it says only 501c3s, and we don't have a friends group that we can have apply on our behalf. Or, oh, shoot, only religious, or oh, shoot, not if you've got one in the past year. There's a whole lot of oh, shoots you need to watch out for. So before you do anything else, make sure that you're eligible. And most of them will have even somewhere in the application like a checklist that says you must be, here's the location, you must be, here's all the things you need to know. So find that checklist, whether it's a list or just narrative, make sure you fit it. Will the budget terms work for this project? By which I mean, know what they're doing with the money, not just how much they're giving out, but is it a reimbursement grant? Do you need to front that money, up front? And are you going to be able to do that? Do you need to have match or in-kind money? And if so, how much? So things like that. And as far as the should I, a big one is, does your project align with the lender's mission? And just because you technically qualify, you may not actually really be the best fit for them. What you want to do may not be what they fund. And we'll talk about that in just a second. But the other thing, do you have the time? What are the odds? We talked about this. If you are looking for one that is a 1 in a million chance and it's going to take you weeks to put together, do you have the time to do that? Or would you be better off trying to do some multiple smaller grants? Can you put your best foot forward? If you find it the night before it's due and you say, yeah, I can drink 50 ounces of coffee and put it together in the next hour, great. Can you do that without typos and somewhat thoughtfully? Because even it might just be that you don't get it, but if people sometimes have long memories, if you think you may want something from them in the future, it may behoove you not to put forth an application that's riddled with errors and just looks bad. That's not a great representation. So if you can't do it right, you might want to hold off until you can. And the same thing goes with the grant project itself. You might find something that looks like it would be the perfect fit. And then you look at the grant period and you say, oh, I have 14 of my 50 employees retiring then, or, I'm down whatever, we're building a new building and we're going to be splitting staff between the buildings then. That might not be the best time to take on a project. So think about whether you actually can do the amount of work that it's going to take. Do your homework. So these are all things before you even touch pen to paper or fingers to keypads. The research funders grant history, and that goes with the previous slide. Is this a good fit? One of the best things you can do is when you're on their grant page, they should either have a link on there, or again, you can just Google this. It's going to be somewhere publicly available, their past grant awards. Look at who the past winners are. Scroll through the list. Are there any libraries in the last 20 years, or are they giving exclusively to schools? They may not say they exclude libraries, but if they don't have a single one on there, you may be less encouraged to go for it. Or look at the project titles and see if they really match up with the sort of thing you're doing. If they're all exclusively focused on elder resources and elder care, and you've got a great idea for a baby's story time and you need resources, that elder care one might be a red flag that says this may not be the best match. Have ideas ready to go if the opportunity arises. If you think of something, jot it down. If you have time to do a little bit of research about resources that would be good or things that you would need, because that way, if you actually do find that perfect grant opportunity, you can put it together a little faster. Make sure you get the appropriate support. This one hurts because I've seen this before where we've given grants only to have the person awarded come back to us and say, I can't take it because they gave us an application, but they didn't have the proper authority to do it. Then the director or the department had somebody said, oh no, we don't have the time or the staffing, or this is not approved. And then they have to come back and say, we're glad you liked our idea. We can't do it. And that's just discouraging for everyone. The other thing you can do to help yourself out before time is to gather the stats that you think will make for a compelling narrative. If you are trying to get resources for hotspots because you live in an area that has a high rate of people without the internet, there's a big digital divide. Great. If you can find stats to back that up in your narrative, if you can say this percentage of our households do not have internet access, or this percentage of adults don't feel computer literate, or there's all sorts of great stuff you can look up there that can help when you are making arguments as far as statistics. And some of those resources I mentioned, the Grantsmanship Center, the Grant Station, they even have links to places that are great places to look for stats like that to make for a compelling narrative. One thing you want to keep in mind while you're doing the grant, these look contradictory, I swear they're not. Focus on people's needs, not libraries. When you are putting when you're putting forth your idea, put it in terms of who is going to benefit besides the library. So instead of saying, like the library needs chairs for the teen department, the library is looking to welcome teens after school because, there's not a lot of places for them to go. There's not in this community, and we want to make a welcoming environment. And right now, furnishings in the teen department to make it look more welcoming and that we want them to stay. So you want to focus on the teens who will benefit in that scenario. And then you go even a step further of not about the need, but the impact. So again, with that hotspot example, we want hotspots because we live in a community. We want hotspots for all of the people who don't have internet access for XYZ reasons, because it is such an important resource. We think this is going to help, with students in school. This is going to help people apply for jobs, students in schools. Like, what are the bigger issues, the bigger implications? Create a work plan. So even before you have to do an official one in your application, you'll probably have to do a nicer one, but kind of sketch out what you need, what steps would have to happen before you got the grant. Do you have to research what's the best software? What's the best laptop? What do you want to buy? Be realistic with your timeline. We love to see ambition. We love to see people who are really excited about their project. But when you are really excited to the point that it's not going to happen, where we say you have A through Z steps, we don't think you're getting to Z. We'd be surprised if you get through D. That a grant maker is less likely to give that because that seems unlikely. It doesn't seem a good use of their money. So be realistic. And if you can only do A through D, do A through D. And then break down into further steps and further things you can do on your own. On the application itself, I will say applications are going to look different. They are, and they may call things by slightly different names, but there are some elements that appear in all of them. One of them is that executive summary. That's almost always going to be the first thing that you have to put on the paper, that abstract summary. It's going to be called something like that. That's your elevator pitch. That's what you use to hook people in. It is the first thing on the paper. I've seen this time and time again, and I can testify it's a really great idea to be the last thing you write, or at least the last thing that you revise, because once you go through the rest of the grant, you may want to tweak that. You may have the best possible wording after you really work through the rest of the details. So it is a short thing. It's only going to be a couple sentences, but put a lot of thought into those sentences because they're going to carry a lot of weight. The narrative is going to have multiple parts. You'll want to talk about your organization, at least a couple sentences that are basically convincing them that you can handle this. Who are your qualifications? Have you successfully carried off programs before? Do you have a ton of people who come for what you already have? Do you, whatever you can do to say, oh, we have somebody on staff who has been teacher of the year 900 times. And that's why we think this, she's going to be running XYZ or whatnot. Anything you can say that basically says, we're not just cobbled together people going like, yeah, no, we're a real organization. That says, we're an organization, we have our act together, we have a history of doing things. Here's why you can give us our money. The needs statement, this is where that keep in mind who's going to benefit beyond just the library and what it's going to do. So the need, and this is where your research is, if you have numbers, will come in handy. So keep it like, it's basically saying, why does this project exist? What need is it that it is filling? And this need statement's almost the before picture, before our project happens, why do they need that? So you'll want to address who needs the help. What problems do they have? Why is it happening? Because how is your project going to address that? Goals and objectives, if there's a section on that, you're answering who's going to benefit. Make sure that your objectives are measurable. Even if it's it can still be qualitative, not just quantitative, but it has to be, you don't want to just put these vague things. We want everybody to feel like they've learned how to use the internet. That's pretty broad. But if you say, you know, our objective is 90% of the people who take this series of classes are going to say post-class in a survey that they feel more comfortable, you know, that's something you can do. That's a measurable objective. The project description activities, here's where your previous timeline is going to come into play. This is what you're actually going to detail what you do. And, you know, our marketing person, our IT person, who's the staff involved with each part. You'll want to put that on there. And then activities, timeline, and evaluation, they have little asterisks next to them because they often get their own section. I will say with evaluation, this is one that tends to kind of, out of all of the parts, this is the one people maybe phone it in the most. And I'm going to skip ahead to a little bit. The best thing you can do is make yourself familiar with outcome-based planning and evaluation. I have 2 links on here. I have to make sure they're on my PDF, but the shaping outcomes is phenomenal. And right now it is temporarily down. And I have contacted IMLS and they have contacted their partner organizations to see what is up with that. I'm hoping it is not down permanently because it is fantastic. It's the OG tutorial. But IMLS itself has a presentation on the same principles that you can access. There's a slideshow listed there, and they're going to say, go watch the shaping outcomes. So hopefully that will be back. It will talk about the difference between outputs and outcomes, about how you want to kind of balance both of them in your project. And it will help you figure out how you're going to evaluate in a meaningful way so that you don't just say, oh, we think people will be happy with it. Or that's not going to make grantors say, oh, wow, you know, this is effective if you have some vague statement. Going back to the budget, just I mentioned, find out if it's reimbursable, find out if there's a match requirement. When you're figuring out the budget and you're making the overall list, think of incidentals. You know, do you need copy paper to promote it? Do you need, you know, all these little things? Don't just think of the big ticket items. And then once you have all the little things in mind, make sure that they're eligible. You don't want to put something in your budget that is explicitly prohibited by the terms of that grant. And the thing I see the most on our end when we do them, food often sneaks in there. We're having an open house to promote this, so we want to have all this food. That is fantastic. We love that idea. Do your open house. We can't buy your cupcakes. It's not okay. The government's very touchy about spending, you know, oh, our tax dollars are going towards cupcakes. We're all about the optics, man. So make sure that your expenses are eligible. Make sure that they support the project, that every single one has, oh yeah, this is why they need this. This isn't them just slipping their wish list in there. We are down to the final 3 minutes. So I'm just we're really close, I promise. Avoid jargon when you're doing this. So don't say, you know, our ILS, somebody who's not in the library world, unless it's a library specific grant, they don't know what an ILS is. So be sure to put it in terms that an outsider would understand. And if you can have someone who's not associated with the project read through your application and say, yeah, this makes sense to me, an outsider who is not involved and doesn't have all the steps in my head, that's a fantastic idea. Keep that funder's mission in mind. If you can use some of their phrasing, if they say, you know, we're committed to promoting financial literacy, you're doing some sort of program, it'd be great if somewhere in your narrative you talk about how this is going to promote financial literacy. Tailor your application to the grant, kind of like I just talked about. If you are sending out the exact same application to multiple lenders, you're not making it specific enough. You're not looking at their mission statement. You're not borrowing your wording. You don't have to start from scratch, but it usually is apparent when someone has like one generic application prepared. So try to make that match up with the grantors. Read all directions, and then read all directions. It's not a great look when it says, oh, submit this along with supplement A, and we don't get supplement A, or it says, you know, we want 2 pages, maximum 2 pages, and you submit 20, because the first thing that says to the people reviewing it is, this person doesn't read directions, and all of a sudden you're back in school and you get 10 points off because you didn't put your name on the paper. It's such a silly way to lose face. And then don't be afraid to reach out to whoever is the grant contact. If you do have questions, they welcome them. That's why the contact is there. The grant contract may even, the contact may be somebody who ultimately chooses who gets grants. And as somebody who has done this, I can say the people who have reached out to me with questions, my brain says, oh, those are people who really want to do well. They're committed. Make sure the questions are answered within the first 3 lines of the instruction, because that's a completely different impression. But if you're a little nervous, if you're not sure if this would qualify, if you're not sure what we mean by this, ask them, because they want to give the money away. So make it easier for them. Solicit feedback. If you do not get it, don't throw up your hands in despair. Feel free to reach out to them and ask, why didn't I get it? You may just find out there were tons of other applicants and yours was not as compelling. That's often, it just means that there were so many and there were others that they liked more. That's all it comes down to. Or they may say, oh, your evaluation section was shaky and we just couldn't get behind it. Or, oh, your timeline looks super unrealistic. And those are things you can fix for the next time and reapply either to them or someone else. If you have a chance to serve on a review committee, it's a great way to see how these things work behind the scenes and the sort of weight they give to things and the discussions that are had. And it's a great way if you have a state grants person who regularly needs people to serve on review committee to just make their life a little easier. And don't we all want to do that? So just think about that. Finally, my contact information is up there. PDF with stuff. I'm sorry, we are right at 12. I can stick around to answer questions if anyone has any and they want to ask. Beth, do you have a few minutes if we need to?
Hi, yeah, sure. I wanted to say really quickly that for those of you who are here live, I have put a link into the chat for you to request your LEU certificate if you need one. And then we only really had one question in the chat. Somebody wanted to know if anyone has feedback on Grant Select on the Grant Select database, and they may have just been asking like the crowd whether anybody else has opinions.
Well, I hope they can crowdsource that, because I have not personally used that, and I have not heard chatter about that. Oh, yeah. And while I'm thinking about it, I do want to, speaking of crowdsourcing, another great place to look for grants, or to have grants brought to you, be on your library listservs. I know we have one gal in the state library, Kara, who does a great job of anytime a grant comes across her desk when she's doing research for webinars or whatever, she shoots that out to the listserv and says, this might be of interest to you. So you literally have some delivered to your door if you haven't signed up for those in PubLib or whatever your local listserv would be.
I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording, Angela, really quick.
Okay.
Thanks to everybody who watches this recording in the future.